All right, so good afternoon. My name is Jannell Pearson-Campbell. I am currently the interim superintendent for Northampton Public Schools. Today I had a beautiful day coming from 9 a.m. to now to learning about your school and the initiatives that's going on. One of the things I met with students today, they really want someone who can connect the schools together. They come through the pandemic and really thinking about my future. What does my future look like, and how can I help you? And from that piece, and also cultural responsibility as we go in. And it was great to hear them talk about what do they need. I also met with the building principals today, and they were talking about their buildings and how can the future superintendent connect along that journey. And I said to them today, I'm like, you know what? You've already talked about how do you improve your buildings and think about a feasibility report, which is good because it means that you're on that process. In addition, working with to talk to the union today, and they gave me a round robin of questions. And one of the things they were talking about was diversity, equity, and inclusion. How do you retain staff? How do you have staff coming into from not just only classroom teachers, building administration, et cetera, and really thinking about what does diversity, equity, inclusion look like. In addition to that, what does STEAM and arts program, how do you develop arts program to continue on that success? And as we move on, the key piece about family and community engagement, how do you make sure that all voices are being heard in the family and community engagement, the voices who are maybe not in the room right now that needs to be heard. And in addition, this morning, it was talking about how do you think about the budget so that we make sure that all pieces are being heard. So from that piece. But just a little bit about myself. This is my 21st year in education. I started as a math and science teacher in Boston Public, and I was mentored to continue on to be a building administrator. My focus area at the time was special education, math, and science. And so when you say special education, is really about, I was that teacher that at graduation, that I wasn't the shout-out teacher, I was the one in the parking lot when my kids come back and say, I passed my first college class. And so I truly believe in college and career readiness. But I also understand that we have students who are coming in whose maybe parents are not with them and their first generation coming into the country, and how do you support them at that part? So really, how do you balance various needs in the district? And so as I continued on in my journey, I was an assistant principal focused on STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. My undergrad was in pharmacy / health information management, so I have a stronger math and science ability. So I think like a scientist in the mathematics. I really step 1, step 2, step 3, even when I send messages out, very sequential in that manner. But one of the most important gifts I feel like I have is honoring parents and caregivers and feel like they have a voice in this piece, and that I do have an open door policy along that journey. And then part of also too of my career has also been assistant director of special education, looking at programs programmatically. How do you ensure that all students feel that they need to move forward, and looking at the different systems in place. And so really has been the conversation of like, how do you ensure that all voices are hearing, looking at the various data analysis from that. And so not to be too technical, because not everybody in here in education, but I try to keep it in that manner. It's like, what does the teaching and learning look like to prepare for students in that area? So I'm currently the interim superintendent in Northampton, and really think about how does culture, how does LGBTQ issues going on at the same time, making sure that we have a balanced approach. So this has been a very busy day for me. I've been running coming down the stairs, but I was able to see that beautiful high school and the needs of the high school that's coming in, and I also went to the other buildings to see how do you move at the same time to build the trajectory. And you see all the building that's coming along, and really some of the conversations that I've had was, how do you prepare kids for a job they have not seen? and how do you prepare for a world that it's going through a change in the past few years? And so I've always had like a balanced approach, and what I mean by that is that we talk about mental health because we just came back from the pandemic, and how do you make sure that mental health is at the beginning, but also social emotional learning and academics, so that there is a balanced piece, because our children went through on the computer. I feel like the Jetsons, remember the Jetsons, where you look on the computer and you see the screen? And this really happened in the past few years. So it's been a journey here. I feel like I've heard a lot, and my goal is really to listen, and to hear about the history of Somerville, how can I help all of us move forward, to continue on the success that you have, but also looking at how can I look at it from a different perspective so all of us can move together. So I hope that was an opening act from there. So, you're welcome.
That's a great question. So, do you see a steady before-school program for Somerville Public Schools?
One of the most important things is, do you see? So one of the key things is working with your after-school coordinator and before-school coordinator to see what opportunities did you have for that, and how will it be financed? Because when you do a before-school program, and you really have to figure out, are there grant opportunities? Do you have stipends opportunities? Do you work with another agency from that? So I really have to look at the funding piece, but I truly believe that you do need a before and after. It's just funding from that piece.
What do you think is the most pressing challenge Somerville schools face, and how has your experience informed how you would address it?
Number one, how do you have a budget that supports all the various initiatives in the building, but also how do you ensure that culture and diversity is moving forward for the school district, at the same time preparing all students for not just only college and career readiness, but for students who are maybe coming in and the English language learners is their first language, and from that piece. So that's the things that I've seen.
And my apologies, I'm supposed to be asking the questions into the mic.
Oh.
Otherwise, the folks at home can't hear them. So just for the folks at home, the first question was, how do you see a steady before-school program for SPS? And the second question that Jannell just answered was, what do you think is the most pressing challenge Somerville schools face, and how has your experience informed how you would address it? And our next question, you want to finish that? Go ahead.
First one.
Yeah.
Currently, right now, I'm in the budget process and really thinking about when you think about funding for schools and looking at the ESSER grants. So our ESSER grants is what the federal government provided for schools during the pandemic. So once that funding is done, how do you ensure that the needs of the district are being met? So my current role right now is really thinking about how to look at a budget from a zero-based perspective. What I mean by that is looking at all the materials that you have in the district and figure out how do we support that in the range. So my experiences have been working with building principals, directors for identifying the needs, also looking at grant opportunities in order to move forward. Because as we move forward and our ESSER funding and our grant funding gets removed a little bit, that's the key thing that has been my piece. How do you pay for everything, knowing that there's needs of the district?
As student needs change, we need new programming. Please walk us through a program you developed from developing a budget, curriculum, and professional development.
I just have the question here too, I think. Okay, so I make sure I have it.
Yeah.
So my role is to really look at the needs of the district. So one of my examples was putting into a math program throughout the district. So my first step was looking at any grant opportunities out there in order to to purchase the material. People don't understand that sometimes a math book series might be $300,000 or $150,000 that can go onto your budget. So my first step was to work with the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning and the state to see what kind of grant opportunities to write the grant for that. So one of the steps is to apply for the grant to see if it's 50% or 100%. 100% means that they'll pay for the entire programming. 50% means half of that money from that piece. So the first piece was to work alongside that to bring in the program. The second piece that I have experienced in was once the program was, you received the grant from the school system, from the Department of Ed, the next part was professional development for your new math teachers. The reason for that, because when you purchase a new material, you want to see how is it being implemented from that. In addition to that, looking at the data analysis, seeing how is it being implemented from a school perspective and all the various subgroups. And so that's a piece is really seeing how can I support. One of the most important things that I have done is really looking at a budget per se to see what grants are out there for implementation of a professional development for core curriculum. Also to looking at the when do you provide PD throughout the year for that piece. And for professional development, you really want to think about how do you teach diverse learners from that math piece and provide PD for building administrators. So when you think about the various initiatives that you need, you're really trying to look at the grants that are out there so it doesn't put a lot of pressure on your budget. And sometimes people don't realize sometimes a curriculum could be $1 million. And you're trying to look at, can you afford that? So you look at what the Department of Ed has offering to support the initiatives. So that has been my experience.
How would you approach discipline policy for the district? What are your thoughts on suspensions, restorative justice, and how to align in-school staff to a common framework policy?
Well, number one is to really look at who is being suspended. First thing I would do is look at the data analysis for the high school or whoever, and a part of it is looking at who is being suspended, do they have an IEP, what supports do they need from that. My thoughts on suspensions do not work. It doesn't really change the behavior unless it was serious, like that someone is bringing in a knife to school that it causes harm. But you really want to work alongside if the student has an IEP, working with the special ed department, working alongside any initiatives from the IEP to make sure that the child has accommodations for that piece. Restorative justice piece, you really have to think about what professional development does each school have someone have the skills for restorative justice? If not, what type of professional development will need in order to do this practice very well? In addition, one of the things that I've also have done is work with parents so they understand when you do restorative justice, you really sit down as a circle and really think about what needs have been done, how any educational practices that need to be put into place so that doesn't happen again. So one of the things And so one of the things most importantly is like how do you look at the policy in the district to ensure that in school suspension there's a process, not just moving to suspension. Is there documentation that the student has received services along that journey? So that's my process.
How can the Somerville Public Schools support and include LGBTQIA+ students, teachers, and staff? What experiences from previous roles would you bring to the position as superintendent in Somerville?
I have the question, so okay.
So just, you're welcome to read it.
Okay. So one of the first pieces having an anti-racism policy so that there's no discrimination policy for someone who has an LGBTQ. That's the first step. But the second part that working alongside of building principals and classroom teachers is like, what are our non-negotiables? Making sure that all students feel like they belong in the school. In addition, the Department of Ed has put together a framework the past 2 weeks about how do you support LGBTQ to students in the community and looking at it from that framework. And then working on the side of what policies that need to be put in place for gender bathrooms, for the classroom teacher, working with the pronouns from there, working alongside for classroom teachers having a professional development, so that for that piece. But in the next few weeks, the Department of Ed will be coming out a new framework that includes gender identity in that policy, and really how do you make sure that it's age appropriateness along that journey for that. So that's one of the things that I have done. And so one of the most important pieces that I have done is making sure that my staff feel that they're supported, that my classroom teachers feel that's supported, that students have a place that they feel secure. And some of the things is maybe having the LGBTQ flag. So kids know that this is a safe place that you can go to, that there's an after-school community event for that. And so that has been my journey with that.
How will you get to and from work? What time would you arrive? What time would you leave?
Well, I drive a car. I live in Easton. I take the back roads to come into work. I probably try to be here by 7:30. Just depends on the traffic, because this morning, well, you're trying to figure out the back roads and the highway. And I also feel that I like to put together a schedule, knowing what my day will look like. So some days my days will start at 7 o'clock. Some days it might be a little bit later. It depends on if I have to do a meeting or from that piece. Sometimes my school date is into 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, depends what initiatives, any school committee meetings from that. In addition, my life doesn't stop. Normally, my people send messages through my email, so I get emails on the weekend. So I think also too is 21st century, where families have sent me emails through my work email. My staff also too has my cell phone. My principals have my cell phone. So this is a 24-hour, not 7 days a week. Hopefully it's 6 days a week that you have time to rest. But that I feel like I've been the educational mayor. Your life doesn't stop, because you have to think almost 4 or 5 weeks ahead of time about how does it work from there. So thank you for that question. I do have fun. I hope I look like I have fun.
It's definitely important. Somerville Public Schools is known for having a strong teachers union. At times, this can be at direct odds with families' needs and desires. How do you balance those constituencies' influence and pressures?
Excuse me. Thank you. I'm going to speak right to you. I think one of the most important things in this role is about how to be respectful and fair. And I think sometimes if you don't understand, sometimes the community doesn't understand there's expectations from the Department of Ed that a teacher or a union person has to be engaged with. Plus, there's a contract that we agree between the union and ourselves. And sometimes what I have done is have meetings with families to explain the rationale why this certain situation has happened, to give that the background knowledge. But in addition to that, what I have also done is have parents come in so I can hear their concerns, but then send them back to the building principal, the classroom teachers, so there's a conversation. And I also understand that their child is the most important child in the universe. And I also believe that I have to work alongside my staff to make sure that this is the best place to work in. Because there's a shortage of classroom teachers. There's a shortage of building administrators. If we don't cultivate a place of sense of respect, then we're going to keep on people leaving the district. And when that happens, that means that knowledge leaves. So I always believe that you have to be able to explain to the community that we are a place of respect and that we're a place that we work alongside each other. You might agree to disagree of what the union perspective is, but we have to be respectful. And I think that's the piece that we have to remember.
Which of your districts that you've worked in do you think may have best prepared you for the complex populations you'll encounter in Somerville? What mistakes do you feel like you've made with complex populations, and what did you learn from them?
Can I go from different ones? I says, currently right now I'm in Northampton, and it's a complex. We have families of a high socioeconomic and families who are just getting by. We have families who have LGBTQ and some families, who are known as caregivers and families. And so one of the things that prepared me for here was really how do you understand the needs of each family? Because right now we're having families who have LGBTQ, understanding what their needs are. Also too for families who are just coming in who English language learners, this might be their difficulties, but I also have professors. So in one room, I have so many different people of different backgrounds, but one of the things, my strength is that not just in meeting and talking, but I will have a presentation so that you can explain why we're making this decision that is entry level for anyone to understand it, that is also accessible, which means it might be for someone has to explain it in their own individual language, so that when a presentation goes off that you're speaking in their native tongue. And so that's really thinking about how do you make sure that balance. But I also feel like when I taught in Boston Public for 9 years before I became an administrator. That also taught me, because I had kids who were first generation college students and whose parents who maybe didn't speak the language, but really how do you be that voice piece or advocate to prepare students for college and career, or for kids who maybe not going off to college, but really think about what are your next steps, what are your plans from that piece. Because when I was a classroom teacher, I had a kid in 8th grade who didn't know how to read. So really it's thinking about how do you think about those complex resources in order for there. And I always say Boston Public prepared me for this position, because I was a math and science teacher, so before you can teach somebody complex mathematics, you maybe had to teach them how to read. And so to me, that was my preparation, because it taught me about data analysis, it taught me about curriculum, it taught me about how to make sure that students have what they need when they leave the door. So I think each place prepared me for my role. I started as a substitute teacher, and now I'm here. And so the various roles have prepared me to have this conversation about it's like my thesis demonstration. But the mistakes I've made along the way, number one, when you communicate, you really have to think about the audience that you have in front. So I've learned how to slow down, listen to the members of the community before I make a decision. One of the things that I have learned, like when you're in a fast-moving district, that sometimes you have to slow down and build those relationships. I call it entering a facility. And so one of the things I learned how to do over my 21 years is really how to enter, how to have those relationships for that. To me, that's probably one of the most important pieces that I have learned on this journey.
With your extensive experience in special education, how would you approach inclusion aligning with IDEA, and what is your interpretation of IDEA in the context of providing services in the general education classroom?
Thank you. Most importantly is inclusion aligning. So when you have an IEP, you have to look at the student's data analysis, the student's goals, to see what is the best placement for that child. So my experiences have been working along classroom teachers and general ed to look at what data do you have. So for example, if the student has a language base, looking at dyslexia screening to see do you have something that identifies the student's language ability. In addition to that, what grade level performance activities that you have done to make sure that the student is placed in the appropriate place. In addition from that is providing professional development for classroom teachers, because student enrollment has changed, and which means learning style has changed. Therefore, before you really think about inclusion, you really have to provide training for your classroom teachers when you place a student into an inclusion setting. In addition, when you hire people, that's the first piece that you have to think about is the type of licensure that you have. So for example, if a teacher comes in or you're applying for a job, you want to see, do they have Orton Gillingham or Wilson, which means that they have a reading licensure. Instead of the student moving out to more of a sub-separate room, that they receive their services inside that classroom. And so you really have to think about what professional development that you have for teachers, when you work alongside on the IEP meaning looking at the data that the student has and for the services, because you really want to have kids the least restrictive environment. And the reason for that, because you want to expose students to grade level performances so that they can meet that along that journey. One of the things is I talk about is the least restrictive environment, and for the IDA, you really want to place a child in the most least restrictive environment. The reason what you do is you really look at the student's IEP, you look at student disability, you're also looking at the services from that to the student for the placement and your program of studies. So when you look at the placement, you really want to think about from that level. And so one of the most important things that I also felt that I have done is working with general education teachers and principals, because working alongside them before they move a kid to the most restrictive setting, you really want to have a team together to look at what implementations have you had, what interventions have you done, and support that student. In addition, having an education with the parent so they understand the needs of the student. And so one of the key things that I have done along the way is have district-wide assessments. So for example, having an assessment thinking about the reading services, the grade level, so that you have data to make that decision, versus coming into the meeting and saying, Johnny's doing very well. Well, show me the data regarding how this child is doing, because you have standards along the journey for that piece. So that has been my piece, because you want kids to be in the most least restrictive setting, grade level expectations as you move forward. And so that has been my experience. I feel like today is like my grad school dissertation.
Since 2020, SPS hasn't had a police officer stationed in schools. Now that school districts are allowed to choose whether or not to have police in schools, how comfortable would you be leading a district without police stationed in schools?
Well, currently I do not have police officers in my school, but one of the things that my wording will be dean of students, really having a relationship with students coming in so that students feel comfortable along that journey. I think one of the most important things that we found is that students need to have relationships with that individual, but also having expectations along that journey. I do know also too, working with, although you might not have a police officer stationed in there, there's times where you might need a police officer for safety issues to come into that building. But I think the first step that we need to do is having relationships. Do you know your students? When a student's coming into the building, do you say good morning and having that one-on-one conversation? I think that's the most important thing. When I was a building principal, I used to be outside greeting my students and greeting my staff. My parents used to think I was the traffic person because I'd be outside directing people, but it was a way that I was able to meet my families, meet my students along that journey. And so those are the pieces that from there. But the key thing is that having those relationships. And there will be times where you need to have police officers come in for safety, because you want safety at the most important piece.
Tell us how you prepared for today and what you've done to learn about our district before you applied.
How to prepare for today. One of the things that I did do was I reviewed the website for Somerville Public Schools. In addition, I have friends who work here, and who have come to work in the district and talked about how innovative that you are. I read the various. Talked about the special ed department, talked about the curriculum that you have, the after-school initiatives. It talked about the VOTEC program. It talked about the community involvement. There's also a report that talked about you looking for someone who's been teaching as your expertise. They also told me about the paperwork that I received about special education, how do you look at your program. They also talked about the various schools. You have the high school, but you also need to look at the other schools and making sure that they're coming up in that realm. They also talked about, I've read about, was family and community engagement. That you have families are very involved, but sometimes you don't have family very involved. How do you provide that support from that? And so, in addition to working alongside what union expectations from there. So that's how I prepared for here.
How will you tackle the old education model, a more traditional approach where sometimes administration and new teachers clash, especially regarding a least restrictive setting in general education?
One of the first things, I think this happens in a lot of places, that you want to do your traditional, I call it the tomato lesson. I just want to keep doing the tomato lesson. But one of the things that the key thing, first of all, is professional development. So you gently provide professional development from September to November, so that each week you focus on one key thing. And then also looking at the evaluations, so you can talk about, okay, open responses. Let's try open responses, or looking at the various needs of the building. But one of the things that I have done, I talk about teach to expect. So each week we work alongside building principals so that they can teach to their building. Then they have time to talk about what they have learned and how to move forward. In addition to that, looking at MCAS analysis. So the summertime, usually around June or July, you receive the MCAS analysis by subgroups, and you break apart that data. And one of the key things is have teachers looked at their data to see how the students are being performed and on the certain assessments. In addition, does the district have a district-wide assessment tool so that you can see how the students are performing, so that you really begin to think about how the data you have in front of you, what needs for the building. In addition, working with the structures of the building to see, does your middle school schedule need to be changed in order for all students to be there? So those things that I have worked alongside building principals in order to really go from that change.
How do you delegate tasks? Please talk about how you build a team that you trust so you can spread the load of this role.
One of I like to plan for the year. That's just my thought process. But what I have done to build the level of workload is really each month put together what's the expectations for that month. So for example, that first month we might be looking at school improvement plan. So one of the things I put together is a template so that when I work with each building principal, we talk about their individual schools. We look at their data analysis. We look at what resources that you have. And then there's a deadline so that they work alongside their classroom teachers, and then I set a time together so that we can go over it together. So each month I send out a memo of what needs to be done. So for example, it's budget season time. The first part I send out to them is an Excel sheet to identify your staffing. The second part is to look at your initiatives. The third one is talking about if you had to reduce staff. So by the time you have that together. And then the third part is working with a subcommittee that we go over what do you need for the building. And so that allows building principals, administrators to work alongside in their buildings, but then we come back together during district times to talk about that. And I try to do chunking a little bit each month so that they can run their buildings, but they also just know that when we go in front of a school committee, they'll be able to talk about what the building needs, the expectations from there. So I'm like a classroom teacher. The reason why I do that, because building principals, classroom teachers have a life outside of here, and that they have to balance it out. Just like a classroom teacher has a syllabus. You know, these are things that need to be done, and that allows them to balance their lives out at the same time. And then also, too, allows me to go into the buildings to see what do you need help with, and it's like, what is your focus area? Okay.
And this is our last question, which is good timing because it's almost 5:15.
Oh, I gotta run to the next place.
Okay, what is your 5-year plan? If hired, would you stick around?
Give me 1 second. I just want to drink something first. Thank you. I think my first year, I'm gonna do it in 5 years, okay? So my first year of the plan is really listening, hearing, and viewing the data of the district. So which means I look at your budget, I look at teaching and learning, I also look at community involvement and being visible so you can hear, like how this form, like right now you give me questions, but I like to be in the community, hear from you. That's my first year. By the middle of January, I'll have what you call my entry plan together so the community knows what I'm going to do for the next 4 years. In addition, after that, part of it is also talk about my findings. So I take my entry plan and I look at all my data analysis so the community knows this is my plan for the next 4 to 5 years. From that, because one of the most important pieces is your strategy to connect to your budget. The reason why you have your plan so that I can say, well, this is, I'm looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, number one, what professional development do we need for students and families. Part of my entry plan is also to what does families need for college and career readiness. Third is for English learner families is figuring out what supports do you need from that. The third piece is that community members can communicate that. So that will be part of my 5-year plan. But first of all, it's the first year of collecting information because I can stand up here and tap dance for you, but I'm not going to tap dance for you. My most important piece is that I have to collect data so that it's customized to you because it is your children, you know what you need, and that's my gift. I have to listen first. So my 5-year plan, my first part of the 5-year plan is to listen to what you need because each one of you is going to have a different need. Elementary school, preschool, ready for preschool, or kindergarten, you might have a different need. Someone else might have a middle school, or someone else might have recruiting diverse students, for teachers. So that will be part of my entry plan. So for the first 90 days is really about collecting information. So when I come in front of the school committee, I can say, this is what I learned about the community, and this is what my plan will look like. So that you know, because first of all, I'm a classroom teacher first. So you have to collect the plan so that when you're at the soccer field, or you're at the football field, or at the local barbershop, you can say, this is what the superintendent will be working on, because then you have something concrete in front of you. My expertise has been working on entry-level PowerPoints, so it's not that boring class. It will be very short and sweet of saying this is what each month we'll look at, and that during the school committee meetings, I'll be able to show evidence of what we have been doing for the past few years. And I think that's the most important piece, because can I show you evidence of what the school has done? And I'm just the football coach throwing it down the field. So that would be my, and if you will.
If we hired you, would you?
Okay, I need my glasses. Okay, glasses from there. So So this is a round robin. That's pretty much what I have done. But one thing I can tell you is that I'm a classroom teacher first. I'm a third-generation African-American educator. I didn't go into education when I first came out of school. I was like, I'm not going to be a teacher like my mom, and here I am. And so I can proudly say my mom is so proud to see me in this role. I come from families that believe in education. My father was one of the first blacks in the Marine Corps, so he taught me about service, he taught me about community, he taught me about hard work. Now, my mom would say, talk about me too, and my mom would talk about how do you bring people together on behalf. And so my brothers and I have been successful. One of my brothers is an electrical engineer, my other brother's a doctor, and I have a brother that's a Peter Pan. So, which means he's my older brother who just still needs some help. But I'm a truly person who believes in listening and guiding as you move forward. And I think that's, why should you hire me is because I do bring a different skill set from here. The reason why I had different roles in different communities, because I needed the experience. I needed the experience to be in front of you. And because this is a complex job, it's not just working with families. You have to know how to close that achievement gap. You have to know what resources that you need in a short amount of time. You also have to get teachers to buy into you, to say, are you going to be there for me? Are you going to stand in front of people to say, you're going to respect my teachers, you're going to respect my building administrators. And there's days where I will have to cancel school for snow days, and I have a process. So that's my key thing. And today has been a busy day, and I have like another 3 more hours or something. But I truly believe that I have an open door policy, and I do believe that it is a partnership. And I hope I can be a partner with you on this journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming. Feel free to come back at 7 or watch it online for the official school committee interview. And we'll meet on these Tuesday and Wednesday with the finalists.